think if we really want to optimize our health long term, we are going to have to do something to eliminate the source of the exposure.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Change the Air Foundation Summit interview. My name is Kendra Seymour, and I'm really excited today to be talking with Scott Forsgren, also known as the Better Health Guy. And we're going to be talking about how to improve your external environment to really, improve your internal health. And so, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor, Kendra.
Now, I'm so excited because you've been on before, and if anyone hasn't checked it out, you need to go onto our website at changetheairfoundation.org and definitely listen to our interview that we've done with Scott. And I asked him for the purposes of today's talk to really hone in on the impact that your external environment has. And so I cannot wait, and I want you just to go ahead and get started to jump right into some of those things that we need to be thinking about and maybe what we can do about it.
You bet. All right, so I put some slides together for this conversation at Kendra's request. So today we're going to talk about improving the external environment to move towards better health and to improve our internal environment. So as Kendra mentioned, we had done a prior conversation about my 11-step model for improving health. Today we're going to talk just about step 2, so improving the external environment with a focus on mold and EMFs. If you want to learn more about the other steps, you can go back to that interview. That was a great conversation that Kendra and I had previously. So I wanted to first kind of talk about mold illness and Lyme disease and just kind of set the stage with the idea that mold illness really is a generalization that refers to much more than mold. So most of the time people think mold illness is mold. It's really not. There's a whole soup of indoor toxins, toxicants that include mold and mycotoxins, but also include bacteria like actinos, like mycoplasma, like endotoxins, which are components of bacteria, microbial VOCs. There's so many things that we kind of put under this umbrella of mold illness. But what we're really talking about is the health of our external environment, kind of related to water intrusion, though when we get into the actinos conversation, there doesn't necessarily have to be a water intrusion. So really looking at this external environment, very similar to when we say Lyme disease, some people are referring to Borrelia burgdorferi, the spirochete that causes Lyme. What we're really talking about is that whole Lyme disease umbrella that includes co-infections, Bartonella and Babesia. And for many people with Lyme disease, which my history was Lyme disease and mold illness, and that's generally my audience and people that I'm interacting with, I would say that mold illness is a very significant factor. And in many cases, mold illness has to be addressed before you can recover from Lyme disease. So we want to make sure that external environment is really supportive of our healing process. So the external environment, which could be our home, it could be our school, our workplace, even our car in some places, that plays such a significant role on the health and wellness of our internal environment or our bodies. So looking at what are some of the things we can do to explore mold in the external environment, self-testing is a reasonable option at the beginning to see, is there potentially an issue here? It is not perfect. Sampling methods really play a role. So some people might be cleaning or sampling areas where they recently cleaned. There's not a lot of dust. Some people may be cleaning the sampling from the top of a ceiling fan that might have had dust for 10 years. So you kind of have to know, what are you trying to answer? What's the question that you're looking to answer? And oftentimes then having even these self-tests interpreted by a skilled IEP is really important. You don't want to look at the ERMI score and draw conclusions. I do think the HERTS-Me2 score is a little bit of a better indicator and can provide some information as compared to the ERMI score, where really you need to look at the specific molds that are showing up and make some decisions from that perspective rather than just, oh, my ERMI score is a 2 or it's a 12. So some of these tests, Mycometrics and Envirobiomics, they both do ERMI testing. You can then calculate the HERTS-Me2 score. Envirobiomics actually calculates that for you. One of my mentors, my primary mentor in this realm, Dr. Neil Nathan, also likes the immunolytics plates that you can put out in different rooms throughout your home. You can then visually see what might be growing on them. You then want to send them in because a lot of what grows on them is not really concerning from a health perspective, but it can be a nice adjunct to the ERMI, the Hurts Me Too. I don't think it's a replacement, but it's a nice adjunct tool. There's also the Real-Time Labs EMA test, which looks at mold and mycotoxins. So if we're looking at an ERMI or Hurts Me Too, we're looking more at mold. If we're looking at the EMA, we're looking at, are there mycotoxins in the external environment? What if you had Stachy behind a wall and that wasn't showing up on an ERMI, but what if the mycotoxins that were being produced, the trichothecenes, what if those were in the environment? So that's another way to look at this from a different perspective. And viral biomics also more recently does actinos, which is a bacteria, and endotoxin testing, which a lot of the IEPs that work with people with mold illness and with biotoxin illness are starting to incorporate into their evaluation. I had done a conversation with Larry Schwartz on actinos for people that are interested. It's still kind of evolving in terms of how that changes treatment of the person. There are some strategies that some of the IEPs are putting together for then how you might improve your external environment. But I think that's an evolving area that we'll still see continuing to be an area that we learn more about. There's also the ETA testing, which is the Environmental Toxic Assessment System. This is from pureairdoctor.com. I did this one recently in a home that I moved into about 6 months ago. It includes the ERMI, the Hurts Me Too, but also looks at a lot of the other VOCs and gasoline and ethanol and things of that nature. So it's kind of nice because you get that perspective of maybe the mold piece, but also some of the other chemicals that can be in our environment that we need to think about as well. So generally speaking, exploring mold in the external environment, I think the preferred option, if you think you have an illness associated to your environment, is to get an IEP. I have a link here that will take you to some resources for where you can find an IEP. The ICI, or International Society for Environmentally Acquired Illness Organization, ICI.org, is a great resource. Change the Air Foundation, also a great resource for finding those people that understand health-associated issues when we're talking about the external environment. How do we improve mold and mycotoxins in the external environment? The two basic, and this is very high level for the purpose of this conversation, but either remediation, so find a remediator who works regularly with those people that have environmentally acquired illnesses, identify the source of that exposure, where was the water intrusion, and remove that from your environment. Really needs to be a professional. This is not something I would advocate doing yourself. I think you can make things significantly worse doing that. Sometimes following that source removal with small particulate cleaning or similar cleaning can be important as well. My personal opinion is that fogging is not a complete solution. You have to find and remove the source of the issue, and then maybe doing some fogging as part of that small particle cleaning could be helpful. But we really want to make sure that whatever the source of that mold, that soup of toxicants is, has been removed. Second option, obviously, is to move. And I see people do that a lot without testing the environment that they're moving to. So if you're making a long-term commitment, ideally you want to test with some of the things that we talked about previously. I have unfortunately seen people go from one moldy environment to another. And so I do think that moving can be an option that's good. But many times with the right support, I think remediation can be very successful. That's not going to be universally the case, but option one, remediation; option two, moving. Air filtration. I know Kendra just did an interview with Carl Grimes talking about this. I don't think that air filtration is a complete solution without source removal. So it can be very helpful in addition to source removal. I have lots of air filters in my home, and I think they are helpful. But if there's an issue, we need to look at that and make sure that that's been removed as well. How do we look at mold in the internal environment? So there's a number of different tests, pros and cons of each of them. There is the urine mycotoxin testing, which is more direct, meaning it's looking for mycotoxins in the urine. It is debated. Some people love this test. Dr. Neil Nathan finds it as kind of his number one go-to. Other people feel that because of food and other sources of mycotoxins that these are not helpful. I do find them helpful. Personally, have found them very helpful. So a few of the options are going to be Real-Time Labs, Vibrant, and Great Plains. Then you can also look at immune reactivity tests, which are a little, I think of these as more indirect. So how is the immune system responding to either mycotoxins or to mold? There's MyMycoLab, Dr. Campbell's work, where we can look at antibodies to mycotoxins. There's Cyrex that has a couple of different panels, the immune reactivity screen, or what they call arrays, that can look at some of the mold and fungal type organisms and how that might be affecting your immune system. There are other tests like the ALA test, mold immunoreactivity test, which really I think of this as more in the realm of mold allergy, which is different from mold biotoxin illness. But if someone has significant mold allergy in some of these panels, then we might also need to ask the question, well, where are they getting that exposure? There are also ways to do through LabCorp and other traditional labs, IgE mold allergy testing, again, different from biotoxin illness, but mold allergy can be a significant component of people's symptoms and something that is often not being explored. We also then have the Great Plains organic acids testing, some of the markers in the first section that can give us some idea about fungal overgrowth, potentially Candida or Candida. That test is being used by some people to consider the possibility of fungal colonization from exposure in a water damaged building as well. Then we have the biotoxin illness tests that were really made well known by Dr. Richie Shoemaker. So things like C4A, TGF beta 1, MMP9, MSH. These can be helpful tools for looking at inflammation. They are not mold specific. So because you have a high TGF beta 1 or a high C4A, that doesn't mean the issue is mold associated. It could be, and very possibly is, but there can be many other explanations for some of those biotoxin illness markers being out of range as well. Then the VCS testing, or visual contrast sensitivity testing, that's something you can do in the practitioner's office or online. That can also give you some sense for the potential of biotoxin illness, again, not specific to mold, but very commonly can be mold associated. Looking at how we improve the mold and mycotoxin situation in the internal environment, meaning the body, after we have addressed the external environment. Oftentimes we're thinking about things like binders to help remove mycotoxins, to minimize enterohepatic recirculation of these toxins in the gastrointestinal tract. Lots of options: bentonite clay, charcoal, zeolites, chlorella. Pharmaceutical cholestyramine and Welchol can be helpful for some people as well. And then there's more and more companies that have created combination products that also can be nice, though if you are more sensitive and don't tolerate supplements very easily, sometimes starting with those single ingredient products can be a great place to start, and then moving into some of these broader tools from Cellcore and Quicksilver and some of the others that you see listed here. Drainage support is another area that I think is really critical as well. So what is drainage support? That is supporting the channels of elimination, supporting the liver, the kidneys, the lymphatics, the extracellular matrix, the gut. How do we optimize the excretion or elimination of these mycotoxins, and generally supporting the upregulation of our emunctories or channels of elimination or drainage pathways? So these are just a few of them that I like and use a lot: Picana, Energetics, DesBio, Nutrimetics, and Beyond Balance. Commonly, when we're thinking about drainage support, we're thinking more about, or I'm thinking more about, homeopathic drainage tools. That's where we get into Picana, Energetics, and the first one listed there, the systemic drainage from DesBio. There are herbal tools as well that can also be helpful in this realm of drainage support. So that's things like the Dandy Complex, the Nutrimetics products, Beyond Balance, and so on. We oftentimes want to also consider glutathione. Many people in this realm will have low levels of glutathione, and if it's tolerated, then glutathione can be very, very helpful in dealing with mycotoxicity. Glucuronidation support, that's going to be things like calcium D-glucarate or products like glucuronidation assist. So that's a phase 2 detoxification pathway that really is the more important from a perspective of mycotoxins. So how do we optimize glucuronidation so that we're optimizing our mycotoxin excretion? And then a whole nother conversation that could go on for hours or days, depending on who you're talking to, is this idea of fungal colonization and using antifungals. So after we fix the environment, we've started incorporating binders and drainage remedies. Maybe there is some colonization in the sinuses or in the gut where we need to consider either pharmaceutical or natural herbal type antifungal interventions. We can be in an environment potentially that has water damage, is a source of fungal or mold exposure. We then become colonized, we fix that issue, or we move to a completely clean environment. But if now the mycotoxin factory is within you, then that's something that you need to address as well, or you're going to continue to have a lot of these ongoing biotoxin associated issues. The next piece that I want to talk about is exploring EMFs in the external environment. So EMF exposure, this whole area is actually something that I probably first learned about from Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt around 2006 when I became a patient of his, and improving the environment from an EMF perspective was a requirement at the time to become his patient. I think most people were kind of laughing at the idea that he was raising such a red flag around EMFs, and yet today I think most people would agree that it is significant and something we need to consider in our environment. So EMF exposure can increase mold virulence, the production of mycotoxins in the home, and some people speculate that that happens in the body as well. So if we have higher levels of EMFs in our home, might some of the organisms in our body also be in more of a defensive mode, producing more mycotoxins, endotoxins, those types of things. Self-testing can provide insights, but is not perfect, again, unfortunately. So if you have a building biologist that's going to come out to your home, they're probably going to show up with 4 or 5 different meters to measure lots of different things: dirty electricity, RF, magnetic fields. There are a couple of them that I've listed here that can be helpful and are ones that I use just to kind of go around the house and see, is there anything that I need to be looking at or turning off, or maybe a computer that's now connecting to Bluetooth or Wi-Fi that I wasn't thinking about. So those can be helpful, the Cornet or the Safe Living Technologies products, but there's lots of them out there. And I think this is another area, probably looking at mold, I would say first, in most scenarios, figuring out that piece, and then getting a building biologist that can come in. In some cases, you can actually get a building biologist that's good with both mold and EMF, but I would say that's probably more rare. So there are building biologists that will come in. There's some listed here: the Building Biology Institute, Safe Living Technologies, and Shielded Healing, which is Brian Hoyer. They have great lists that you can look at where you can find EMF experts in your area that can come in and help you identify some things. In my previous home, I had done a lot of the self-testing. I still had someone come in, and there were a couple of things that they identified that I was not able to identify on my own. So I think that's time and money well spent in terms of optimizing our external environment. Some of the things we can do to improve EMFs in our external environment: testing, obviously critical. That's what we just talked about. Let's see, what is the problem? What do we need to look at to minimize our exposure to EMFs? And then mitigation, this is really the more important piece. So mitigation, we could also say reduction. We have to reduce our exposure. So how do we do that? Making sure Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on our computers are not on. That seems to be a common issue, that you look and, oh my gosh, how did Bluetooth get turned on again? Or how did Wi-Fi get turned on again? So making sure that all of those devices, the laptops and the tablets and printers and all of that, are not using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Yes, you can hardwire an iPad or similar types of devices. Having the Wi-Fi in your home turned off, or at least on a schedule so that it goes off when you're sleeping. That's going to be the most critical time. If you do need it for some reason in the daytime, make sure that it's turned off while you're sleeping. Not using your cell phone, obviously, to your head, but using speaker, using texting, airplane mode as much as possible. Sometimes I'm surprised how many people charge their cell phone on their nightstand right next to where they're sleeping. Not a good idea unless you're in airplane mode. I definitely wouldn't do that. And then more and more, we're moving into the realm of smart homes. So I think of smartless homes. So wiring your Ring camera or whatever cameras you're using, if those are transmitting all day through Wi-Fi, that's potentially a source of exposure that could be mitigated or reduced. Not having Wi-Fi turned on, it's surprising to me that now we can turn on Wi-Fi on your oven and your dishwasher and all these kinds of things. And so those are things to consider. There is a JRS Eco wireless router that many people in the realm of EMF sensitivity or electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome have found helpful. Seems to be biologically better tolerated than a lot of the other routers that are available. In some cases, looking at a sleep canopy or the Silverline cloth that you can put around your bed so that you're reducing the incoming exposure from EMFs can be great. I did that for 16 years until very recently when I moved to a place that seems to have lower levels of EMFs, and would certainly be open to doing that again. I think it was tremendously helpful. Things like not having metal springs in your mattress, that can be then an antenna for some of these EMFs. Looking at demand switches where you can have a remote control that's on your nightstand, you push a button and all of the circuit breakers or most of them throughout your home will turn off so that your body voltage is lower while you're sleeping. That can be very helpful, getting less exposure to dirty electricity once the circuit breakers are turned off. Putting something on your cell phone, on your laptop, on your tablet that's going to help with the mitigation or reduction. So Defender Shield is one company that has some of those cases and things. Safe Sleeve is another. Protective clothing is an area that is getting more and more attention. So companies like Lambs, BioPure, there's a few others. Dr. Klinghardt talks a lot about using protective clothing to help minimize our exposure to EMFs in the environment. In specific rooms, you can use EMF blocking paint. Y-Shield paint is one, and so that can also be very helpful. You then can't really use devices in those rooms, or you potentially are going to amplify the issue, but EMF blocking paint can be helpful. Filters for dirty electricity, so things like Stetzer filters or green wave filters in your office or places that you spend a lot of time can be very helpful. And then if we move into harmonization, again, the mitigation or reduction piece is really the number one area. We need to reduce our exposure as much as possible. What can we then do to harmonize the EMF exposure that we're getting? There's lots of companies that have things you can put on your phone, you can have in your environment. Do I do some of those things? Yes. Can I prove that they work or are significant? I think it's challenging to be able to prove that. You're not going to see a change with an EMF meter in terms of actual reduction, generally speaking. So I don't think harmonization can be the primary strategy. I think that we need to make sure that we're first mitigating or reducing, and then this is kind of icing on the cake. So there are products out there like the Somavedic or Aries Tech or different wearables like the Lila Quantum Heal Energy Capsule that some people may find very helpful. Again, not the first line strategy for reduction or mitigation of EMFs. There are things that we can similarly do from a supplement perspective. Again, we want to reduce as much as possible, mitigate as much as possible, but then things like rosemary, propolis, Supreme Nutrition has a product called Bodyguard Supreme, which is a Chonka Piedra that can also help the body in dealing with some of the EMF exposure. Des Bio has a nice homeopathic called EMF Protect and Balance that can be helpful as well. The other piece that we want to think about with how do we minimize the impact of EMFs in our external environment is also that the more heavy metal toxic we are, the more of an antenna we become for a lot of these external frequencies. And so sometimes heavy metal detoxification can also help improve our sensitivity to EMFs. And then limbic system retraining, which really goes broader than just the EMFs, but many different things in our environment that we may be reactive to over time because the limbic system has a heightened alarm switch or heightened safety center where it's kind of feeling like something maybe in the past was a tiger. Maybe you had a significant mold exposure in your home. You've remediated it. It's now very, very improved. It's now like the kitten walking outside the window. And yet when your limbic system sees that small amount of mold, it reacts as if there's still a significant amount of mold or EMF or whatever that is. And so in people who are sensitive to many things, light, sound, chemicals, all of those things. The limbic system retraining can be helpful and can certainly be helpful in many people that are dealing with more EMF or electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome. So that really is my quick look through mold illness and also EMFs, two things that we need to think about in our external environment to support our internal environment. They're not the only two. I mentioned there can be chemicals and other VOCs and things that we also need to look at. So this is just very high level, but I think these are two of the more important things. And then I just listed here a number of the conversations that I've had previously on the podcast that hits on these topics that we just covered. So mold illness, EMFs, those types of things. A number of these conversations were fantastic, and I'm grateful to have had them with some of these amazing people. So I think that is my quick run through on how we can improve our external environment to support our internal environment, or improve our external environment to improve our health.
Scott, thank you so much. I absolutely love this. There's so many actionable things that people can do and start thinking about. And I can attest to the fact that your podcast has so much great information. I've been listening for years. I think one of the challenges, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, is when we're talking about things like mold and EMFs, these are often things that we can't see. I mean, sometimes you'll have the mold growing up the wall, but it's often hidden in EMFs. And so I think it's something that out of sight, out of mind. And, you know, people sometimes tend to dismiss, well, if I can't see it, can it really hurt me? And this sometimes manifests, we see this a lot, where one person in a home, the spouse, is like, well, if it were mold, we'd all be affected the same way. Or for its EMFs, we'd all be affected the same way. So why is it that people in the same family living under the same home aren't having the same symptoms?
Yeah. I think part of that is going to be genetics. So if we look at Richie Shoemaker's work with the HLA-DR genes, there are some people that are more predisposed to be affected by these biotoxins, mycotoxins, mold exposure. I don't think the HLA-DR story holds up as well now as it may have many years ago. And so my hesitation with it is, while it could be a good indication of predisposition to biotoxin illness, it doesn't seem to correlate very strongly to one's ability to recover from biotoxin illness. So if you have some of the more complex, and I don't even like to use the term that's sometimes used, but if you have the more complex HLA-DR types, which I do, there can be this idea that you're then not going to be able to improve. My health today is very, very good. Yes, it took a lot of work, but I do not believe that genes tell the complete story. I think it's much more complex. But to your question more simplistically, I think genetics does play a role in our potential to be impacted by these things. And then to the kind of out of sight, out of mind. Unfortunately, that is one of the challenges in this realm, is the vast majority of people with water intrusion, with mold in their home, probably aren't seeing it. It probably is more hidden behind a wall or someplace that it's not going to be super obvious that, oh, there's, black mold growing on the ceiling. That does happen as well, but I would say that's probably the rarer case. So that's where the immunolytics plates can be helpful. If you can put these out in various rooms and a few days later you can see mold starting to grow on these plates, then you say, oh, visually now I can see there is a potential issue. So that's one of the reasons that Dr. Nathan has been an advocate of the immunolytics testing, because it gives you that visual where you can say, oh my goodness, there is really an issue here. With EMFs, there isn't so much the visual, but if you get some of the meters that I talked about, the Coronet, the Safe Living Technologies, those things, you can audibly hear as you get closer to sources of EMFs, you can hear that difference. And so it's not necessarily visual with your eyes, but at least it gives you a sense where you can hear, oh, there is actually a higher level here, here, here. So it's not always going to be visual in the way we'd like for it to be, but I think the plate testing and some of the meters can give us some proof, if you will, that there is a potential issue that we need to explore more deeply.
No, that's really helpful. And you have probably one of my all-time favorite quotes. You have said, and I think you said it in your last interview with us, that, we can never really be healthy internally as our external environment. I'm paraphrasing poorly there. You say it more eloquently, but I guess one of the other questions we sometimes get, though, is what happens if I can't remediate right now? What does that mean for my treatment? I know I love that you focused on reduction and source removal, but for some people, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
excuse me, that's not possible. So what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. And I get this question from people both in terms of mold, but also, okay, I have high levels of EMFs, but I just have to have my devices or my phone or whatever. There's no way I can live without them. So, I mean, there are some realities in what we can do and then what we can expect from a health improvement perspective. So are we going to be able to be healthy in a home that has water intrusion and has mold if that's the trigger or one of the more significant pieces of our symptoms? Probably not. Same thing with EMFs. If that's an issue for people, we need to reduce them. I think if someone in the short term can't immediately move or do significant remediation, then maybe looking at some of the ways to incorporate binders, looking at how can we support improved excretion, whether that's drainage remedies or in some cases coffee enemas or whatever the tool is that can help you to remove as much of that from the body as possible. And then air filtration may have a role in also helping to make things a little bit better. You have to be a little cautious depending on what filter you're using. If you know that you're in an environment that's problematic and then you want to take that somewhere else or you fix the problem, maybe then you're going to have to either get a new filter or replace that unit or whatever. So that's something to talk with the manufacturers about. And then since we know that mold causes a chronic inflammatory response syndrome, sometimes incorporating things that can help reduce inflammation, whether that's curcumin or a host of other tools that are out there, that can also kind of help to mitigate some of the symptoms. But long term, I think if we really want to optimize our health long term, we are going to have to do something to eliminate the source of the exposure. So if people can't do that now, I do think there are some things that you can do. But if we think of the exposure itself as kind of the hole in the bottom of the boat, some of these other strategies might be bailing the water out of the boat with a Dixie cup. So it's going to be better than nothing. But long term, I think we need to make sure that we are doing what we can to the external environment to minimize as much of that exposure as possible. There is no mold-free environment. Dr. Klinghardt tends to use the term mold-poor. I think that's more what we're shooting for, is minimizing mold in the environment. But I do think that at least based on the tools we have now, improving that external environment is unfortunately still one of the things that most people will need to do in order to recover.
Yeah, and we've said this before at the foundation, and it's a popular stat, but we spend more than 90% of our time indoors, breathing in air that's potentially bad for our health. And that number is pre-COVID. And I think the study was done, for in the United States. But to start thinking about that reality, the air that you're breathing in your office, in your school, and what steps can you take to really minimize and reduce exposure? Because, and I know you've seen this before, so often, people are having symptoms and it's dismissed as something else. Oh, you're getting older, or, you have young kids, you're just not sleeping well. And you might be surprised to see, some of those symptoms, GI issues all of a sudden start improving once you start really looking to your external environment. So
I totally agree. In fact, Dr. Anne Corson, who's been one of my mentors for many years, talks about the mycotoxins and the impact that they have on the gut. And she says that mycotoxins, in terms of what they do to the lining of our gut, are like throwing sparks on a silk scarf. So if we're looking at things like leaky gut and things like that, that mold and mycotoxin exposure could certainly be playing a significant role. Most people in functional medicine say, let's start with the gut. My primary mentor in this realm, Dr. Neil Nathan, he would say, except if you have mold, then you need to fix that issue first, and then you can start getting to some of those more GI-focused functional medicine protocols. But I totally agree. Our external environment impacts us in so many ways, and the gut is certainly one of them.
Yeah. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. If somebody wanted to get into touch with you, I know you said tell us your resources again.
Yeah, so betterhealthguy.com is my website. Podcast is there. There's a contact link that people can reach out. I'm more than happy to connect with people and share as many resources as I can. And I just want to say, Kendra, thank you for what you're doing with Change the Air Foundation. You guys are a relatively young organization, and I think that you're having a significant impact and making a huge difference already. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your coming on and talking to us multiple times and your support. We're really all in this together. And I think the more of us, that spread the message and start asking questions, we all just want to live healthier and happier lives. So thank you, Scott, so much. And for everyone listening, do me a favor. If you haven't yet, head on over to changetheairfoundation.org. Sign up for our newsletter because it really is the best way to get information like this directly to your inbox. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.